Hello there, go-getters and world changers. Welcome to another energizing episode of Coffee with Convery. Today we're serving up a steaming cup of inspiration with a side of girl power. Get ready to meet a true force of nature who's shaking up the innovation landscape and empowering women, left and right. She's an award-winning leader, a two-times TEDx speaker, and the founder of Women Helping Empower Women. Our guest today is Dr. Georgette Zinaty, a powerhouse professional who's been making waves as the chief of staff at Myant, a cutting-edge Canadian company driving innovation in advanced material science. But that's just one of her many impressive roles. Dr. Zinaty is also a Canadian country chair for the G100 Mission Million, advocating for gender equal futures and a member of the prestigious Forbes Coaches Council. With over 15 years of experience at the University of Toronto, she's raised millions in funding and created groundbreaking programs. Named as one of the six Canadian women of inspiration, Dr. Zinaty has expertise in leadership, diversity, and inclusion, and innovation has made her sought after as a speaker and a thought leader. Let's welcome Dr. Georgette Zinaty to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
So excited to see you today and have you here to talk about your wonderful career and all the impact you've had and inspire this generation to think differently. But before we get to that, I'd love to jump in and talk about maybe some rapid fire questions to get the audience to get to know you a little better.
You bet.
What is your superpower?
I'm going to say I like to think I'm kind and my entrepreneurial spirit, which is what I've been told.
Awesome. And thinking about the senses, I always like to focus on one we don't always focus on, but what is your favorite smell?
So I love the smell of fresh ground coffee and then
Yes.
flowers. So two different things. And
That's
you're never going to get us one answer. It's going to be two. I'm not
that's
a
okay.
Gemini.
Okay, there you go. That both are great. Both are great. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
uh, so I'm going to tell you one of the things that always made me sort of just glow is when someone says you're highly intelligent. And so they focus on like the fact that to me is like it's really important that you come across and people value that. The other thing is somebody once called me Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I didn't know who was. And it was a professor, it was a gentleman I worked with, and he'd say, "Make it so." And I get like thinking, is that a Britishism? And then he said, "No, you're like Obi-Wan Kenobi." And I went, "I don't know who that is." And then he brought me the movie and he goes, "Go to the gate, do the scene with the gates." And I'm like, the next day coming, it's like, "I'm the old guy." And he went, "Make things
The
happen."
wisdom, the
The
wisdom,
wisdom, the mind
the
control. I was like,
wisdom.
okay, so Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I took that as a big compliment.
I like that too. That's great. I would
Yeah.
agree. Um, what is your favorite go-to snack?
Hmm. So I do have a weakness for chocolate or nuts or chocolate covered nuts. And if those are not available, maybe blueberries because they're good oxidants.
Nice. Yeah, I love
That's
blueberries.
logical, right? That's logical and
Yeah, and I'm
healthy.
sad because this
Healthy,
time
right?
of year the blueberries
Protein.
are starting to disappear now. It's like I love blueberries.
Aren't they healthy?
Big time. I
Big
love them.
time.
I love
Yeah.
them. Um, Thinking back, it doesn't matter if it's high school, university, what college, whatever, but what was your favorite subject?
English and history.
English and history. I love that. The last few podcasts, English has been the number one thread. I think that's really interesting.
Interesting.
In the
So, I
guests.
think it depends on like so I actually end up majoring in English and political science in university. And I think it's because the professor was so good. Because
Yeah.
I we would read a book and then I'd be like delving into all the different messages within it. And I was like, wow, I had no idea what I was reading had all these different things. So it taught me to look at things from multiple lenses rather than just kind of what you think the story really is. And that
Yes.
transformed so much of my learning and how I see things.
It's amazing. That's a great point. And it also shows that people in these different types of subjects and ideas and degrees can be very successful in life. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. Thinking about jobs, we all started somewhere. What was your very first job?
I was a page at the Oshawa Public Library. So that means I checked in and checked out books and then put them away and then did some children's programming on Saturday. And I loved it every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Is that what they called it, a page? I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
not new to me.
it's called the page, like turn the page, but
Yeah.
But of course, it actually also, I think, just reinforced my love of books because you'd be putting books away. And also, it was interesting because it's always the same people that would come in and you could see what they were reading, right? So it's just
Yeah,
interesting because you kind of see somebody differently when they come back with a stack of books and you're sort of seeing, and they're regulars, right? It's really cool. I loved
that's
it.
super cool. Insightful to the what's behind the person that's returning the books. One last thing, and then we'll jump into your
Yeah,
career and things. If you had to describe yourself in one word, what would you say?
boundless, no limits.
Nice, nice, awesome. Okay, so let's jump in. We wanted to get some insights into your experience, what you've been doing, and inspire people to think about the world we all are living in and working in. So you've been recognized as one of six Canadian empowering women. I mean, congratulations. That's huge. And you've won the Aspiring Innovative Award. What does innovation mean to you, and how do you strive to embody it in the work that you do?
Yeah, for me, I think it's about rethinking and then redefining what we know to create ideas or projects or inventions or whatever it may be to make the world a better place. For me, that's kind of the underlying thing because I always think about what's your legacy going to be in terms of what you do every single day? What do you want to leave behind? And for some people, legacy is big L, and for some, it's a small L, but it's a legacy regardless. And then I personally always like to add an inclusion lens to any conversation. So, what are we not thinking about when we're looking to do better and be better? Who should be at the table that isn't at the table when we're talking about improvement and new ideas? And ultimately, like who's going to benefit and how can we make sure that we improve the lives of others in what we do daily? So that's sort of really important to me. And then I recognize there's going to be bumps on the road in
Hmm.
terms of the things that we do. So it also means that we're going to be making introductions for others, mentorship, sponsorship, and giving people a place to shine and, maybe stepping aside sometimes if that's what it requires us to do. So all of those things are for me about empowerment, about innovation, about really creating um, just making the world a little bit better and all the work that I do on a daily basis.
That's wonderful. We need more Georgettes in the world, I'll tell you. It's we do. We
I
do,
hope
especially
so.
now. Don't you find especially now? Seriously though, like especially now it's
No,
the
I
tough,
mean,
tough ride right now.
it is a tough ride, but I honestly, I have this true belief. I've always had this thing where it's important to like always kind of put it out there, do better.
Yeah,
And if you do good, it's just not just good karma. It's just I truly believe that if you do that, you live as a happier life and a better person. And I have literally been rewarded my entire life. And I don't mean money wise. I just mean in the experiences that I've had, the relationships that I've had, all of that. So I'm a huge believer in just doing good for good and it comes back tenfold, if not more.
it does, and that's a great lesson to share with our listeners because when you put out kindness, it does come out tenfold, right? When you do
It
that.
does. It does.
Uh,
It may not always seem that way, but it does
it
eventually.
does. It definitely does in different ways. As the
Yeah.
founder of Women Helping Empower Women, what inspired you to create this organization, and what's your ultimate, I guess, vision for the impact?
Yeah. So my own experience as a woman rising uh, was had challenges, right?
Yeah.
And my experiences though were really reaffirmed when I was doing my research and interviewing countless women at all different stages, but mostly sort of senior level, but different backgrounds, different sectors, and realized like there was a lot of similarities in that experience. I wasn't alone. And then I decided that we actually need a platform and movement to focus on what I call the power of one and the power of us, which is really much about that we can each make a difference and collectively we can actually change the game if we really wanted to, but we have to be able to recognize some of those barriers that we sometimes create for ourselves, whether we realize it or not. So it's okay to open the door. It's okay to be a champion, not to think about, oh, if I get there, if that means there's only room, so it's either me or you in one spot, rather than saying, well, if I go, I can actually take a bunch of people with me, right? Or open the path or
That's
trailblaze
right.
forward and all the steps. So, you know, what has really been inspiring for me when I started this and kind of the growth. I mean, we have a significant membership. We've done partnerships with other organizations, which is really great. But what's also interesting is part of what we do is I encourage women. And I mean, we have men and women, but we have a lot of women, and not to let your fears, your insecurities, the judgment of other people, which
Hmm.
is really why women sometimes don't help other women or don't help themselves necessarily. And then transforming, my hope at the end is through the work that we do on a daily basis. I get women and anybody who's part of our organization to transform how they see themselves, to see the opportunities that I see in others, and then be able to kind of improve the relationship we have with ourselves. Because if you're confident and you have a great relationship and you know who you are, then it's very easy to be able to kind of go out there and give and take these risks that we often talk about. And, I think it really changes, the data to improve kind of where things are going to be for women. So I'll give you a recent data point. I was talking to you earlier before we
Yeah.
officially started. I said, I felt there was this, I could see women losing place compared to where they were. And I know people talk about the pandemic being very bad for women. We know that, we saw the data, not surprising. But what's interesting is we saw up and then it's actually been much worse since. So the rate at which women are being hired into senior leadership positions has fallen 32%. This is the same low bar that was set during the pandemic
Wow.
in 2020. And I'm quoting here, this is a Forbes article, and it was based on research done through LinkedIn. So the reason this resonated was I've seen it. I have people in my circle where I've seen this happen and they have not been able to bounce back to where they were before. And so for me, with Women Helping Empower Women, we offer programs, events, we partner with organizations. What we want to do is amplify our work and then be able to help these women kind of reset and go to that next level, recognizing that sometimes you have to step back to get ahead.
Do you have, with that stat, which is startling, do you have any thoughts around why has it dropped so low or why is it so bad? Like what?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, in some of the work that in the research I was reading, the articles talk about, how we can, when we're hiring, how to do it sort of at the
Yeah.
front end, right? So having more inclusion at the front end. And I'm not sure that that's actually the solution. I mean, yes, for sure, you need that. My concern is there's attrition happening, that these positions are being eliminated or
Yes.
women are kind of being pushed out. That's more my concern, which speaks to a culture issue
Yes, it does.
rather than a hiring issue, if that makes sense, because they're in those jobs. So they got in and they're good enough to get in. The question is, why are the jobs being eliminated or being pushed out or made uncomfortable or whatever that is? And I've seen this across sectors, and I know women in these sectors.
Yes.
So it seems to me it's a culture issue. And what I've been thinking about, but this is, I'd love to do more research in this
Sure.
space, is there data that speaks to, the discomfort that the representation has become a bit stronger? You know what I mean? It's like if you look at the C-suite, for example,
Yep.
women were 6%, then they became 8% of this, C 500. That number went up right before COVID and then went right back down again. So the highest it was close to 10, and then it's back down to about 8%. But to give you a data point that I often use, because this is when my son was born, so that was 25 years ago, that the C-suite, 2% women 25 years ago. Now, at 8, maybe 9, it was most 10. 25 years, that's all we've got. That's not a lot, right? But
Not.
now my question is, if they're making it to, and this is Fortune 500, but let's assume that number is, somewhere fuzzy in there at the C level. What's happening here that these women are now being pushed out and we're seeing this decline? And I don't think it's women exiting necessarily. I know during COVID, women did exit. They were different levels. They weren't necessarily C-suite. That was a different, because, there's a lot of bookending happening with people
Sure.
being at home and children and work-life balance and all of that. This is a different story. And I don't know that we have enough, but, I'm sort of interested in wanting to reach out to some of these women and saying, what do you think? Is there a thread in there that we're not seeing?
That's really interesting. And I think just to go a little deeper, because it's really intriguing to me on this topic and from the like being the recruiter side for like 20 years, at least plus in talent, but I especially focus on the emerging talent, but one of the trends we used to look at was we had pipelines that were equal, and then when they got to the hiring manager, if we could tell how many we put through, and also based on people self-declaring all different diversity and
Yeah.
inclusion about themselves, we knew that. And then when it dropped off at the hiring manager, that's when I was like, well, we are actually introducing gender, diversity here. And when it gets to the hiring manager, who, how many of the hiring managers are men? How are they viewing or doing this situation? And so I think it's interesting too of what you're saying is about with the roles being eliminated or things going away. I think that's that. But now, as we start to prepare to bring women and try to change this, we need to make sure that that front end, that machine, I guarantee you that a lot of these organizations have women applying. and qualified.
Yeah.
It's who's
Yeah.
making the decision as the gatekeeper if they go any further.
Right. Right. So this is really, so I'm going to drill down on it just one more.
Sure. No, I love this
So
topic.
what you just said is, so what you just said is, so there's organizations like yours that help get people in the door, and you're pushing for equity and
Yep.
inclusion. Great. So let's assume that's happened, and some of these women that statistic got into those doors and got into the C-suite and to senior level roles. But then once they've been in those jobs for a little bit of time, are they pushing too hard? Are they too vocal? Are they making people uncomfortable? Are they pushing certain boundaries? So what's happening now is those jobs are being eliminated, right? Or they're being
Gotcha.
pushed out, or they're being packaged out, whatever you want to call it. No problem. But now, when those hires are being made again, they're not women, right? Which is why you're seeing that percentage I just gave you, right?
Yeah,
So they're exiting and then replacing them again with what makes them comfortable,
that's right. Yep.
right?
It's a whole
Right. So
cultural thing. I agree.
right. So then that's
100%.
why, sorry. So that's when I was reading some of the research that was being written. They were saying, well, what we need to do is the hiring. And I'm thinking, hmm, yeah, for sure, we got to keep an eye on that. But I don't think that's actually the problem. I think the actual underpinning problem is the culture, because once they're in there, and they're all like, I mean, I can tell you from at least 10 women I know that are exactly in that spot, and they're diverse, right? So they're women of different backgrounds,
Yeah.
religions, ethnicities, sectors. I've seen this for the last while. In fact, I was actually on another show on Rogers talking about the fact that this was concerning to me, but I literally now have the data to reaffirm it. But now I
Yeah.
want to do more research. That's my own to figure
Thank
that
you.
out.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. And thank you for speaking up. I think we do, not I think, we know we need to speak up on these areas of opportunities. Given two TEDx talks, that's incredible. I've done one. I thought it was really fun. And I know people, listeners, especially on this podcast, are always curious about how did it feel? What
Yeah.
was it like? So could you share maybe like how you felt, what it was like? Because I always get that question
Okay.
too. I was like, I don't remember
So
what I talked about because it was so fast. But
So
anyways,
you
go
know
ahead.
what? I had two different experiences. So the first one, I was knee deep in my research, and I was like going to do about women and the scarcity of women in leadership. And then about a week or two before, they said, you know what? We've got three people talking about the same topic. Can you change it? And then maybe talk about it from an immigrant lens. And I was like, okay. But then, I was doing it at UTSC, and my immigrant experience was very different than other people's, in the sense that we came to Canada, but my dad, like, we weren't poor,
Right.
right? Like, my dad had come as a business person. So, I mean, made some decisions that we weren't like super rich, but we didn't, like, we came and he could buy a house, he could buy a
Yeah.
car, that kind of stuff. So for me, it was very hard putting it together. And then I was trying to memorize it so that it would be
Right.
seamless.
Right.
And I could not do that. I tell you, my daughter memorized it because I practiced it so much. So the funny part was when they called my name, I blanked out on the first, like, what's my first line? And so I actually did convince them to give me cards. They had to be black so they couldn't really see them. But once I got kind of past the first part, which was kind of telling the immigrant story and more into the literature and the scarcity of women, then that's the part where I look at when I watch it, I think, okay, I can just see my comfort level changing, because
Yeah.
that was kind of where I really wanted to be. And so then I think it got better the second half. Now the second one I did, their talk, the theme was the butterfly effect, right? The chaos
Yeah.
theory. And what I wanted to do was give it the lens of every action has, a reaction to it in a different way. So I then talked about stories where, someone influenced me and that changed my life. I influenced someone and that totally changed their life, and the ripple effect of that on that person's community. And that was easier. And I did not practice it. Nobody in my family had heard it. And my daughter heard it, I think, about an hour, maybe 35 minutes before I was about to go on stage. And I just had images that they could put on the screen, and those images reminded me of the stories. And I
Yeah.
felt like I was more natural doing it. But I can just tell you, I cannot be an actor or a singer because I'm not going to remember the words for 15 minutes. I can promise you. There'll be no soliloquies by this gal.
Yeah, it is an interesting experience, and it's thank you for sharing, because I know people are, you know, um have that sometimes on their bucket list to do, and I do think it is an interesting experience, and
Yeah.
everyone's experience is different though, for sure.
But
As a
did you get into your own head? I'm just gonna tell you, I got into my own head because I thought, what if a million people see this? Like this is
Yeah,
gonna be of course a million people didn't see it. But
right.
I thought, like, oh my God, I really gotta get this right. You know?
It's true. And I'll share really quickly. I remember saying, you're going to have a timer there, right? So we know what the 15 minutes. So I started and there was no timer. And that's what threw me because I said, because you know, in
Oh,
your head, you can kind of
yeah,
pace,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
I
yeah.
had no sense of time when I'm talking about something like that. And I came in at 15 minutes, but I said to them afterwards, where was the timer? I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. No, I
you
had the time,
said there was
but
a timer. So,
yeah, I was worried I was going to speak too fast and I was
yeah.
trying to pace and my family was in the front. And actually the first time I did it, like the kids were crying and which was like, it was like, oh, so
Aw,
it's a proud moment for sure.
that's sweet. That's a wonderful experience. As a Forbes contributor, you have the powerful platform to share ideas. What's one message you're particularly passionate about conveying to the readers?
So I often will focus on what I'm going to talk about, like thought leadership and rethinking what you know. And what I mean by that is, you go to school, you're conditioned certain ways in organizations about how to
Yeah.
see something in a particular lens or what you think you know. And I'm always about, well, what's that part that we're not seeing, right? What's that kind of blank space that, if somebody had posted something on LinkedIn the other day, or whether maybe it was Instagram, it was like a dot on a white page, and the professor said, write a story about it, right? And everyone was writing about the black dot, but no one was thinking about the white space and all what that could possibly mean. And I remember reading that thinking, yeah, that's a good analogy in terms of how I think. So it's seeing the opportunities in organizations, like how are we leading by example and not being afraid to be authentic in that and owning that space of yours. But like one of my favorite articles that I wrote for Forbes was called what I call the 5 Ps. And it was interesting because it was one of the first articles I wrote and got published. And it talked about people, purpose, planet, profit, and planet. Well, you can't do all of that without having some profit if you're a company that wants to
Right.
succeed. But we often don't talk about the pivot. Like a company needs to have what I was my research for my MBA, which was fragility, the ability to kind of pivot and move. And what's interesting is when I wrote that, we were kind of starting in the pandemic, and then we saw that people that did not survive, companies that did not survive the pandemic, were companies that were not able to pivot, but didn't have the
Mhm.
agility. And
That's
so
right.
to me, like that was sort of so that when I talk about thought leadership, I think about, okay, this is what you think you know. Let me add a few more things that you probably haven't thought about and where I see us playing, where I think you could see success.
Exactly. Wow. Super, super interesting and insightful too to focus on that. You're right. Let's see. I know another I'm blown away, by the way, of all the awards and recognitions and things. Like you are, I'm so excited to have you on this show because it's just incredible.
I'm so happy
Uh,
to be here. Thank you for
oh,
having
no,
me.
you're welcome. You received the Heritage Hero Award. How has that influenced your leadership style and maybe your approach to innovation as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, it speaks to, when you talk about the heritage here and the things that we do in the community, about our intersectionality and our identity. I recognize I lean into the fact that, I'm an immigrant and I've seen the world through multiple lenses. And also, like as you get older and you have different experiences, you see that. And so for me, it was really important about learning how to be a leader with empathy and being able to kind of put myself in somebody else's shoes and being able to understand that and then recognizing that you have to have compassion. So sometimes, particularly for people who may be newcomers or others, or maybe people have had a setback and are reinventing themselves. How do I open a door? How do I help? How do I give a lending hand? And reminding them that they all have a superpower, whether they realize it or not, and that it is a thing. And for many people, it's different. Sometimes people say to me, well, I have an accent. I can't tell you how many times I do training or coaching or public speaking, and people come to me and say, yeah, but I have, and they'll start with, I know, I don't know if I have an accent. I'm like, I love accents. It's what makes us wonderful. It makes this country great.
Exactly.
This community. And I'm so happy none of us sound exactly the same. How boring would that be?
Terrible.
Says the girl with red lipstick and curly hair.
But you're right. I'm with you. I don't, yeah, interesting. And probably speak three languages as well as have an accent. So look at that,
Yeah,
right? Like, come
yeah,
on,
yeah.
that's a good
It's
thing.
good. But I do think our intersectionality and being able to understand that and
Yeah.
identity is so important. And then having empathy for what somebody else may be going through on the other side, whose
Absolutely.
intersectionality may be much more complicated than mine, and then being able to kind of find a happy place.
Absolutely. Thinking about the listeners now, and I know I can imagine this is going to have a lot of listeners, of all different backgrounds, but even thinking about younger women and younger women coming up through the workforce, what's a piece of advice you would share with someone who's maybe just starting out, maybe they just graduated or they're going into their first internship, trying to find their voice, trying to figure out who they are? Any advice around how to navigate this a little bit from your experience and what you're trying to promote?
Yeah. So I would say work on your presence, and I'll talk about that in a minute,
Okay.
and be fearless, but not disrespectful. So what that means is, just don't let a no get to you. If someone says no about like I want to do this or have a great idea and someone shuts it down, it doesn't mean that you keep pushing till you really upset them. But being able to learn how to navigate those and recognizing that no's sometimes are a good thing because then you're going to learn from a different experience. But be fearless, being able to ask, working on your presence. And what I mean by that is you have to believe in yourself. You have to invest in developing your capacity as an individual, as a leader. Like, what does that look like? What kind of leader do you want to be? And not assuming you have all the answers to everything, because even at this age, I don't have the answers to everything. But it's important to have some self-confidence in who you are. So when we
Mhm.
talk about presence and leadership presence and executive, whatever you want to call it, is that how are you showing up every single day?
Yeah.
When you go to work, and that don't mean just what you're wearing. I mean about are people experiencing daily, what does that actually look like? And that becomes part of your brand, and that is the thing that's going to open doors for you. And so if you are showing up in a way that people think, I love hanging out with Brian every day, he's like so good, I love his energy, all of those things are going to open much more doors for you. And I think also having an opinion and being able to share it in a thoughtful and respectful way. So, I often work with young women and, all genders actually, but talk about how are you framing that so that we can get to where you want to go in a conversation. So rather than saying, no, I don't agree with that, I always say, well, that's an interesting perspective.
It is. And I think, we hear the people remember how you make them feel,
Yeah, of
right?
course, of course.
And
But I've learned when sat around the C-suite, mostly
yeah,
men, and this sometimes listening to ideas and thinking, is this for real? Because I know it ain't going to work, in my head, because I've actually done the implementation of something, right? Theoretically, it sounds good, but actually, when you try to execute, it won't work. And so I've learned to, smile nicely and say, that's such an interesting idea. Can we drill down that on a little bit more? And then, do you mind, may I just ask a few more questions? And as we do that, I can poke the holes in it nicely without saying, oh, that's not gonna work, which is probably what your 20-year-old self would say,
yeah.
but your much older self would frame it and say, that's really that in this way, that's really interesting. So let's talk about how that would be executed.
I want to ask you a slightly different question than now too is I've been talking the last week at a lot of young people's conferences and various conversations and presentations. However, one of the messages I've been trying to drive home, and I'm curious what you think about this, is just because it is doesn't mean it has to be that way.
Right.
And when I look at this generation and they're asking me, I kind of flipped the conversation and said, you can change it. You don't have to do, you don't have to
Yeah.
keep doing what's been done just because for whatever reasons, you're being shut down, you're not sure you can speak up. But there was something specific, and I don't need to get into it here, but it was really about how do we convince the listeners here, and a lot of these folks are early in career, just starting out, thinking about going away to university. And I think this generation has a lot of this perspective, but how do we tell them to get to mobilize and get enabled to make the changes? I just feel like if not, it's just going to keep rinsing and repeating. Any
Yeah. So
thoughts?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a little story. My own son, who's in high school, silly
Okay.
kid.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, I guess he had some assignment and he was able to solve it. I think it was a math thing. And but he didn't get full marks because the teacher said, well, you didn't follow these steps. So he said, but I followed these two. So he did it in a shorter way, and they wanted him to follow the process that was taught.
Huh.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm just to give you another data point, my daughter, when she was in the same school years ago, they were taught division different than you and I were probably taught division. So she comes home and she needs help, so I'm teaching her my way. So then she goes back to school, and the teacher calls me and says, "You can't be teaching her that. This is not what we're teaching." I went, "Doesn't it does I don't understand." It still gets to the answer. Like I'm teaching her how to divide, whether it's the new system of how to do division versus when I was in school, it's still correct. She said, "No, we cannot accept that." And I said, "That makes absolutely no sense."
No.
And so it speaks to two different things. It's interesting to me because when I look at young people, I feel like do question all that stuff. The problem is the systems that we have in place that you cannot question. You need to follow what we told you to do, which is what's happening in the school that both kids went to. So I actually said to her, "I'm going to call your teacher. We're going to have a conversation because that's actually not okay. Because what you're doing is limiting the growth mindset and saying there's only
That's
one way to
right.
get the solution." And I'm saying to you,
Absolutely.
"No, there isn't." Now he's not cheating. He's not just putting in the answer and looking. So he actually was doing it. He just found a different way to do it. So they should be applauding that, not negating it. So when you give me the example that you just gave me, what I would say is rather than discouraging them, what I would encourage them to do is think about how do you reframe the questions
Hmm.
so that that person that you're flipping the tables, as you sort of talked earlier, on somebody and say to them in a nice, respectful way, because they're going to talk, because of the age gap, my guess is they're going to say, "No, you just need to do it this way." But to say, "Can you explain to me why it can only be done one way and not the other? Because if I was to be in the workplace right now, would we not be looking for multiple ways to get to the same
Hmm.
solution?" So I need you to convince me as a younger person why it has to be that particular way. Now, there's a precedent and there's only one way, but if I can show you a different way, would you be open to that? And maybe that's a question that a person has to say to that person is,
It's a
if I could
great.
show you a different way, would you be
Yeah.
open? If it was more efficient, would you be open to that? What if I said to you, I could get you here and save you 20%? Would you be open to,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Attach a few of those things to it. Exactly.
Yeah, and then you're saying it in not in a threatening way, like, "No, I don't think so. I think we could do it this way." And again, the language matters. When I talk about presence and leadership, it is really about when I say how do you show up, I I work really hard, even with my own kids, to say, I want you to think about the language that you're using and the
Yes.
questions you're using. Because I wish somebody told me that earlier, because I think I would make faces, probably without even realizing I'd be saying and going, "What the hell?" Right? So
Yeah.
now I
Me too. Me too.
in my head maybe, but yeah, but also being learning
That's why
to
I can't play poker.
yeah, that's
Just
right.
forget it. I'm done.
I
I'm
agree.
like,
I agree. But
we'd
that's
be
really what
terrible on a team together then. Forget
you like.
it. Yeah.
But I agree because I think that's when you kind of learn to hone the skills of how to ask the questions and turn the tables without having them be defensive. Then I think
Yes.
you're also tying it to a win for them.
Wow. This is, I think, a whole podcast in itself. Because when you
Yeah,
start to dive into this, no, like, I really, we got to talk more about this because I think there's an opportunity. We got to get this
let's
word
do
out.
it again. Let's do it
Let's do
again.
it. Let's do it again. Because this whole idea feeds into cultural intelligence as well and neurodiversity and everything else that goes on.
Yeah.
And if you keep doing it the same way and don't welcome, it's like you, I also had sometimes where you're so close to something and you're like, why are you not getting it? Right? Like to someone else, right? And you're just like, what are they? Don't they hear me? They hear you, but they're hearing something different because they come from a different experience. And now I know that, but back then I didn't.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. You're like, "Oh, wow." But this is what I'm saying. So I've actually had like my son's son called the teacher mom. But to me, I think there needs to be a conversation because I'm pretty sure that my son's probably not the only one. But even if he is the only one,
Yeah,
I don't want his creativity shut down.
no,
Like if the answer is right and there's different ways to get there, then I think they're missing out on seeing they being the teacher and the rest of them on seeing that different perspective. And so, I do a lot of like you, I do public speaking, I do
yeah,
training, I do coaching. And, if somebody kind of challenges it, I actually kind of like it because, like, what am I not thinking about? Because I tell people when I do this, it's a two-way learning. As much as I'm doing this, I'm learning just as much back.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think more to be done in this space because as you go through different aspects of your life,
Yeah.
you're curious as a kid, then you're standing in line, then you're following the one rule, then there has to be growth mindset at work. Well, I mean, you're
I
all
think it should be growth mindset from the beginning. I'm just going to tell
I
you.
hey, There you
I,
go. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah,
That's it.
for sure, for
Well, this
sure.
has been such an incredible conversation. I knew it was going to be. I think you're terrific and engaging and have so much to give and share with us. So I want to thank you so much. Is there anything we didn't get to that you wanted to share out with the listeners, or any other tidbits of ideas that you wanted to share with the
Oh my
audience?
gosh. Well, I thought you said we can have another podcast, so let's do that. But
Okay.
between now and then, I think it's important for people to really honestly self-reflect and decide who you want to be and how you want the world to experience here. And I think if you can figure out, and that takes reflection and some time, but if you can figure that out, who you are at the core, and those are going to be so critical because it's what makes you unique. It's your UVP. It's what makes you shine. It's your authenticity. And people will connect with that any day versus someone who pretends to be something they're not. Right. And so I think those are really important things because you will also figure out where you're willing to compromise and where you're not. And to me, like
Absolutely.
integrity has been really, really important. And I think the other piece I would say is, I tell people you're always in the driver's seat, whether you realize it or not. So you can choose what those boundaries are that you set for
That's right.
yourself and the decisions that you make. And last but not least, surround yourself with like really good, what I call your board, your advocates, but also people who are going to give you the real deal
Yeah,
and not be mean about it, but just say, this is where I think people are going to help you to open doors and take you to that next level. So I think if you can do some of those things, it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're 15 thinking about where you want to go in life, or you're 50 and transitioning into a new role, or not employed at the moment and thinking what I do next. All of that matters, and that applies across the board.
great, great insights, great advice. Thank you. Thank you again so much for being a part of
But
this
thank you.
experience.
Thank you for having me.
It's
It's so
so
nice.
sweet.
Great
It's,
energy.
thank you. You too. It was great. This was a wonderful podcast. So for our listeners, if you like what you heard today, you can share this podcast with your network on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please give us a rating if you can, and you can follow all of the podcasts on Instagram at Coffee with Convery. For now, this is Coffee with Convery, where we show you that success isn't always about climbing the corporate ladder. Sometimes it's about building your own jungle gym. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll talk soon.